So today I'll explain you about data conversions or data migration. So what do you mean by data migration or data conversion? It is nothing but migrating or converting non-SAP data into SAP. Let's assume there is an organization which is running on third-party systems as of now, and recently they migrated all their systems into SAP ERP. Now, what is the primary task when they've implemented a new system, a new software? All the data, whatever they have created till now, that will be in some database, right? Some third-party systems database, right? For example, their daily transactions, their sales orders, their purchase orders, all those will be maintained in some third-party database or maybe in some Excel file, correct? So whatever the data they have maintained in their third-party databases or in some Excel files, whatever, we have to migrate everything into SAP. Once SAP implementation is completed, right? So as part of the implementation, data migration is also one of the primary activity. Okay. So when you are implementing SAP in an organization, you have to migrate all the data available in third-party systems to SAP tables. Correct? Is the historical data or what kind of data we are going to migrate? Operational data. Mostly we migrate operational data, right? Operational data in the sense maybe last 2 years or 3 years data or 5 years data, right? Even if you take operational data, that will be in millions of records, correct? Now, how to convert that non-SAP data into SAP? There are different ways of converting non-SAP data into SAP. Now we are talking about bulk data, not one record or two records. We are talking about millions of records. Okay? How to deal with the millions of records? How to migrate millions of records into SAP? So what are the different approaches available? So the usual process, what happens is uh, the business analyst or whoever handling the project is going to take dumps of that data into Excel files or into some notepad files, text files. And then as a ABAP consultant, you have to create programs to upload that file data into SAP and to upload that file data into SAP and need to create that data in SAP tables. So file is the one input for data migration programs. That might be a application server program file or so in data migration, what are the inputs? File. File is the one input for data migration program. That might be a .txt file or .xls file, or there is one more file .csv file. CSV files also we used to take comma separated files. So these are all the inputs. So all the data in the third party systems will be taken as a dump into these files, all those millions of records. Then we need to upload we need to upload these files to the program. This is one process. This is the input. We're talking about input only. We're not yet dealing with migrating. First, we need to take the input data from the third party systems into files. That might be a text file, Excel file, or comma separated file. Okay. Now, this file might be a local file in the sense in your local system. In your local system, you are going to upload that file. You are going to keep that file in your local system and you are going to upload. Or might be application server file. What is application server? It's like a shared server, FTP. FTP server, it will be some, it's like some online, okay? It will be saved in some server, so we can access from any program. You don't need to keep that file in a local system. It will be in a shared server. We call that as FTP, file transfer protocol server. It is a folder in like SharePoint or local file. Local file in the sense the file which is in your desktop or in your laptop. You are going to upload it to the program, or you can also provide file in the server, file in the FTP server. You can also pass that as a input. So program can read file posted to the FTP server or local server. So once you got the file and uploaded the file, what will happen inside the program? You need to read that data into internal table. What is the first step? Read file to iTab. What is the next step? So do you think whatever the data available in a file is valid? Do we need to accept and create straight away insert into SAP? For example, in this file, the current file, we have employee payroll data, like employee salary and everything. So can we, without validating it, can we straight away insert into SAP database?
No.
No.
No, sir.
So you have to perform validations on the SAP, sorry, not SAP, that third party file data, validate data. Once the validation is completed, what is the next step? Create data into SAP. Now, how to create the data? What are the different ways to create the data? So here we have different techniques to create the data in SAP. BDC. When we use BDC, when we have a standard transaction code or a custom transaction code, when we have a screen, right? When we have a screen to enter the data and click on save for that employee payroll data, we go for BDC programming. How BDC programming works? How we are going to create material? Can you tell me? Let's say we have material data, material master data in the file, which is maintained in the third party system. Now we are going to migrate all that material master data into SAP, right? Usually, how we create material master data in SAP? What is the usual process? Open MM01, right? By using MM01 transaction code, right? So we are going to open MM01 and we are going to provide the material numbers, material type, industry sector, unit of measurement, material description and everything. And we are going to click on save. Then it's going to create the material, right? Is that correct or not?
Yes.
Yes, correct.
So in this case, we can use BDC to replicate the same process, to repeat the same process. What we do? We record the screen process here. BDC, whenever I am talking about BDC, you have to talk about screen processing. Screen processing. What we do in BDC? We record the screen process and we repeat the steps for each record. Okay? First we record what are the options we are selecting and what are the values we are entering, and we are going to record everything and we are going to repeat loop for each record of the same process. That is called BDC. BDC deals with screen processing. We can also call it as screen simulation. Okay? BDC, the abbreviation is batch data conversion. What we are going to do in BDC?
Screen recording. Repeat and
Record the screen process.
We are going to repeat the same step again and again. How we do manually, how we are creating the record manually, we are going to repeat same step for every record. That's what we do in BDC. Okay? So BDC is a screen processing. What is that T code to record the screens? What is the T code to record the screens? SHDB. So in BDC, to record the screens, we use SHDB and we use that screen recording steps to simulate the process. Okay? Okay? So using that recording steps, we are going to create a program to repeat the same for every record. Okay? Inputs will be different. So material number one, the screen will repeat. For material number two, the same steps will repeat, starting from providing the material number, material type, industry sector to click on save. How we do it manually, it's like a robot. Okay, it's like a robot. Once we program it, and it will do every time the same steps. Instead of we clicking on it, the program will clicking on those options. The program will click on every option. The program will click on save button. The program will click on tab. The program will select any back button. Everything will be handled by the program. Okay, that steps we are going to provide with the help of SHDB recording, and we are going to loop all the records in the file for the steps. So if you have million records, so the process, the screen process will execute for 1 million times. Okay, the same steps. It will open MM01, it will enter the data and it will click on save. The same process will repeat for all the records. Okay, here we have a session method. We have session method and call transaction in BDC programming. We are also having a LSMW. Mostly we don't use very frequently. Functional people to upload some test data, they use LSMWs, but these are the three methods available in BDC programming: session method, call transaction method, and LSMW. In session method, all records will be created at the end. First it will generate a session. Once all the errors are fixed and if there is no errors, then it's going to create the records into SAP. But call transaction is different. It won't wait for the previous record. It will create the records one by one into SAP. It will insert the records one by one into SAP. But the session method is different. First it will create one session, and when we process the session, if there is no errors, then only it will save all the records. If there is at least one error, it's not going to create any records. Okay, that's why session method is synchronous, call transaction is asynchronous processing. Session call transaction is faster than session method. But when you deal with the huge data, right, the preferable method is a session method. Okay, okay, when you have some thousands of records, right, you can go with the call transaction, because we don't have proper error handling in call transaction. Again, I'll explain every technical detail when we are discussing about BDC. So let's come back to our data conversion. What is the first approach we have to migrate non-SAP data into SAP? BDC programming. In BDC we have session method, call transaction method, LSMW. So what it follows? What BDC follows? Screen processing. Okay, screen processing. It's not going to update data directly to the tables. Just it will enter the data to the screens and it will click on save. So whatever the standard program available, whatever the standard screen available for the transaction code will handle the rest. Okay, we are not going to write any insert statements, update statements, anything. We are just providing data to the screen, the standard screen available. Okay, the next approach available is BAPI, business application programming interface. What is BAPI? What is BAPI?
Business Application Programming
It's a
Interface.
function module. Okay, please remember BAPI is a function module, one type of RFC function module. All the BAPI function modules name starts with BAPI. BAPI underscore sales order create, BAPI underscore sales order change, BAPI underscore sales order delete. So if you observe in BAPIs, every process will have three different. What are the different transaction codes available for purchase order? Create purchase order, change purchase order, display purchase order, right? In BAPIs also, we have similar process. We have a create BAPI, BAPI to create the purchase order, BAPI to change the purchase order, and BAPI to display the purchase order. You can find three different BAPIs commonly for sales orders and purchase orders. Okay. So what is a BAPI? BAPI is a function module. It is a RFC function module. Okay, but both RFC function module and BAPI are not same, but BAPI is also a RFC function module. There is a little difference between RFC function module and BAPI. RFC contains exceptions. BAPI does not contain the exceptions. Do you know what are the exceptions in function module?
To handle the errors. Errors.
To handle the errors, we raise the exceptions inside the function module, but we don't use exceptions in BAPI. How it is different from RFC? RFC can be called only within the SAP system, within the same system or in the other SAP system. RFCs can be understandable for only SAP systems. But what about BAPI? BAPI can call in SAP systems as well as non-SAP systems also can call the BAPI function modules. For example, you have a third-party system where you are using to create the purchase order. But the purchase order should actually create in where? SAP. But you are using some screen, some portal that is non-SAP system. What you are going to do? You are going to enter the data, purchase order related data in the screen, and in the back end, what they are going to call? Maybe the Java developer or .NET developer, they are going to call a BAPI function module to create the sales order or purchase order. BAPI PO create. They'll call that function module and they'll pass that input, whatever they entered in the screen, and where that BAPI, where that purchase order is actually going to create in SAP. That BAPI will execute in SAP and the record will create in SAP. Okay. So that non-SAP systems can also use BAPI to access the SAP data. Right. I'll explain more when we are creating a BAPI and when we are accessing the BAPI. Okay. So difference between RFC and BAPI is RFC contains exception and BAPI does not contains exception. It uses the return parameters. Okay. Clear? So now we'll talk about core functionality of the BAPI. As I said, SAP has provided standard BAPI function modules to handle the business process, like to create the purchase orders, to change the purchase orders, to create the sales orders, purchase orders, to create the materials. For most of the business functionalities, SAP has provided BAPI function modules. Whatever we are doing in standard transaction codes, the same data will be created through BAPI function modules, right? But why they have come up with BAPIs? To provide access of SAP data to external systems so that they can read the data, SAP data, or they can create the data inside the SAP. Okay. For example, if you take any, for example, if you take phone pay, you can recharge your phone numbers in phone pay, right? Is it correct or not? Any mobile operator phone numbers you can recharge using phone pay app, right?
Yes, yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
But where you are actually creating that recharge transaction, is it in phone pay server or is it in some Airtel server? When you are doing a transaction, recharge transaction,
Airtel,
Phone
sir.
pay.
you are
Phone pay.
creating the transaction in Airtel server, that recharge transaction in Airtel server, right? Then only Airtel approve your transaction if it is successfully created in their database, right? But how PhonePe is able to create the transaction in Airtel system? We are using
Air-
PhonePe to create the transaction in Airtel database. But how PhonePe is able to create that transaction in Airtel database? Because
It will connect to the Airtel server.
Access, it will give access.
Airtel will provide a application interface, API. We call that as API, application programming interface. Here in BAPI, API, application programming interface. So Airtel will design one API to handle that recharge transactions. So in that API, what they are going to implement, they'll accept that recharge amount as input, and they'll create the record in their database. So that API will be provided to PhonePe. PhonePe will use that API to create the transactions in Airtel system. Not is that by using that API, Airtel can create any transaction? Sorry, PhonePe can create any transaction in Airtel? No,
No,
only the
sir.
specific functionality which is defined in that API. The functionality for which API is designed. Okay. Similarly, in SAP also, each BAPI is created for specific functionality. For example, creating the sales order, there is one BAPI. Changing the sales order, there is one BAPI. So depends on the requirement. The third-party systems can consume that specific BAPI function module, right? That is one scenario. And let's come back to our migration, bulk data, batch data migration. How we are going to use BAPIs? So in place of BDC, we can use BAPI, because BAPI won't follow the screen processing. It will directly update the database tables after. So BAPI will perform all the data validations. If the data is valid, then it will directly update to the database tables. It won't follow the screen process. It won't open the standard transaction code, and it won't populate the data to the fields, and it won't click on the save button. What the BAPI will do? BAPI will directly interact with the database tables, and it will directly insert data into database tables. So BAPI is faster than BDC, and BAPI is efficient than BDC. Why we are saying such? One reason is BAPI is faster because it will directly update data to the database tables. It won't simulate that screen, right? If you are using BDC, first it needs to open transaction code, then enter the data, and click on next, then enter the data and click on save. But when you are using BAPI, you don't need to do all these things. You'll just directly update data to the database tables by validating the data if the data is valid. When we are using BDC, there are some limitations. When the system upgrades happens, right? When the versions got changed, SAP versions got changed, there might be some changes to the screen. There might be some changes to the screen. But the previous recording, whatever we did, right, using SHDB, that may not support the current screen process. Options might change. When there are change in options, your previous recording is not going to work. Once again, you need to record once again, you need to change the program to work. Okay, but in case of BAPI, you don't need to do such things because it directly deals with the database tables, right? If there is a change in screen options, BAPIs are not going to impact. Okay, clear? So which is the preferable option for data migration?
Baby.
BAPIs. BAPIs.
BAPI is the first preferable method. If BAPI is not available, then only we need to go for which one?
Can't we create our own BAPI, sir?
We can create, but we cannot create a complex BAPI, right? Let's say if you
Yes,
take
sir.
sales order creation, the functionality and validations are very complex, right?
Yes,
You
sir.
cannot create even in 1 month that
Okay.
complete validations and things. Okay, if it is a simple
The
functionality, certainly you can create custom BAPIs. Custom BAPIs also
okay.
we create. We used to create custom BAPIs, but not for the very complex functionalities. Okay,
Okay.
and which is
Okay.
already available. Let's say There is no standard transaction code available to create the purchase order, and there is no BAPI available even. Then what we need to do? We have no other choice, but we need to create a BAPI, our own custom BAPI. Okay.
Yes, sir. And
But
the program,
when we have a standard transaction code and when we don't have BAPI, so we can go with BDC
okay,
because one other option is available, right? Even though it is not preferable.
yes, sir. The program before for the BAPI is also the BDC program, or it will be the normal thing, sir?
BAPI is not a BDC. BAPI is entirely different. BDC follows screen
Okay,
process. How we are doing it
okay,
manually, it will just repeat the same steps. Instead of you clicking on the options, program will click on those options on behalf of you. Okay?
okay, sir.
By writing BDC programming, you are borrowing someone, some assistant for you to click on the options instead of you.
Okay,
Okay?
yes, sir.
Just like substitute in the cricket. So instead of you running between the wickets, your substitute will run, right?
Okay, yes, sir.
So that's what we are going to do with BDC. Whatever we are doing manually, it will repeat the same steps by repeating the screens. But BAP is different. It's not going to work with screen process. We don't need any recording here. It will directly
Okay,
update the data to database tables, just like how we are going to call the BAPI, just like how we call a function module.
function
Because
modules.
it's a function module, we are going to provide the importing and exporting parameters, and it's going to return the status. Is that record created successfully or not? Okay.
Yes, sir.
So that's about BAPI. So we have two approaches, BDC and BAPI. What is the other approach we have to create the data? Direct table updates by using a insert statement. These are direct table updates. We can also call hard insert or hard data creation, right? We are going to write direct insert statements or modify statements to create that record into database table. But this is not a preferable approach as long as there is no validations of any data. Okay. Sometimes we use these direct table updates. Sometimes we don't create a BAPI function modules to create data into SAP. If it is a simple functionality, we need to create some data into SAP. We can certainly use a direct table update by using insert or modify statements. Okay, clear? This is about batch data migration, batch data conversion. I'm not talking about the general interfaces. We have a lot of other interfaces like idocs, proxies, okay, and RFCs. We have different approaches which are going to insert data into SAP. We have idocs also, but that is not intended for batch data migration, bulk data migration. When we are discussing about interfaces, we are going through all those things like idocs and RFCs and proxies. Okay, we have web services, many different things, but they are all not intended for batch data migration, bulk data migration. They are just to create transactional data, daily transactional data, maybe some thousand records, 500 records daily. Okay, they are not indebted to, they are not designed to handle millions of records at the same time. Okay, clear?
Yes, sir.
So when we are going to run this data migration, when this data migration activity will happen, is it going to happen daily? Data
No, sir.
migration activity will happen only at the time of implementation. Once your system is live, we are going to run all these data migration programs to upload that non-SAP data into SAP. That is a one-time job. Data migration is a one-time job. We are not going to run these data migration programs daily. Once the system implementation is completed, once the SAP implementation is completed, what is the next step? We have to create the data, right? In SAP, whatever the previous data we have in different other systems, correct? Previously, we might use one software for employee payroll maintenance, one software for invoice generation, and the other software for sales order creation. There might be multiple applications. Now, what we are going to do after implementing the SAP? Everything we are going to do in SAP only, right? For that, we need to migrate all the non-SAP data, which is all available in different systems, into SAP, correct? So that's what we are going to do using a data migration. It's a one-time activity. Once you are done with the data migration, there is no use of these programs usually, right? Whatever the programs you developed for data migration, they are for mostly one-time use. After implementation is completed, after all the data is migrated, is there any use of your programs? Is there any use of your programs, whatever you created for data migration? Once the data is migrated from non-SAP to SAP, there is no
It's
use.
very rare.
There is no use, but maybe very rare, as you said. If you need to repeat the same step, if there is any issues, to fix the issues, you may need to repeat the same steps by deleting the existing data, right? So data migration is a okay. Data migration is a one-time activity after the SAP system implementation. You're not going to run this daily. But again, these programs are very important to migrate the non-SAP data to SAP, because without having any data, what we are going to do in SAP? But if you want to see purchase orders created last week, are these records available in SAP? So your, for example, your SAP system go live is today, 28th January. And if you want to see purchase orders created in the last week, can you see those records in SAP?
No, sir.
When you when I am saying that system is go live, it's a empty system. The tables does not contain any data. They're all empty, right? If you go to EKKO table, you cannot find anything. It will be empty because no records created yet. The records are going to created from tomorrow, sorry, from today onwards, right? Whatever the purchase orders going to create, they will be created in SAP from today, right? Because the today is the system go live. But what about the previous records created 1 month ago? You cannot access them without migrating that non-SAP data into SAP, correct? So after data migration is completed, then your normal regular transactions will happen. Okay. So any questions here? So to upload this batch data, bulk data, mostly we use, or any project will use files, text files, Excel files, or CSV files. They'll take dump of the database or third party database into files. Okay, and we need to create the program to read these files and validate the data and use one of this approach to create the data in SAP. We might use BDC, BAPI, we might use a direct table update. Okay, but what is the preferable approach out of all these three?
Mapping.
BAPI is the preferable approach. Okay, BAPI is a function module, RFC function module. What is the difference between RFC function module and BAPI?
RFC the same
RFC
system.
contains exceptions.
Error exceptions.
We can call RFCs only in the SAP systems. Not, we cannot access RFCs in the non-SAP systems because non-SAP systems cannot understand the exceptions. Okay, that's why. But BAPI can be called in non-SAP systems also. But both are function modules only. RFC function module and BAPI function module, both are RFC function modules only. But what is the difference in BAPI function module?
Mapping does not contain exception.
BAPI does not contain exception, and BAPI can be called in non-SAP systems also. Okay, we'll discuss in detail about BAPIs when we are working on BAPIs. Okay, the first step we have in data conversions or migrations is working with files. Upload the file data into internal table or download the internal table data into local file, or upload the files into application server or download the files into from application server to our internal table. Okay, application server nothing but FTP. The T code is AL11. AL11 is the transaction code. Right, A11 is the application server transaction code. Application server nothing but a FTP folder. Okay, the program can read files from FTP or from our local system. Okay, clear? Any questions on this? So the first step in data migration is, first we need to read the file. Depends on the type of the file. For that we have different function modules and class methods to read the file into internal table, and we need to validate the data inside the internal table, and we need to follow one of this approach to create or to insert the data into SAP. Okay, clear? Depends on the requirement and the scenario, we are going to choose that specific option. Is it BDC, BAPI or direct table update? If you go to BDC, again we have two different methods, session method and call transaction method. So out of these two methods, which one is the faster?
All transaction.
All
Call
transaction.
transaction, because it won't wait for the previous record status. That might be successful or failed. It won't wait. It will go for the next transaction, next record. Okay, that's one we called as a asynchronous update. Asynchronous update. But session method follows a synchronous update.
Synchronous.
It
Yes.
won't create any records immediately. First, it will process all the records inside the internal table and it will create a session, right? And then we need to process that session. When there is no errors, all the records are successful, then only it's going to create records into SAP. Let's say there is one record error, one record is failed to create the data. It's not going to create all the records as long as that one error is fixed. Okay, clear? But session method contains better error handling, but call transaction doesn't have a implicit or inbuilt error handling. Okay, we're going to see when we are working on these programs in detailed options and differences. In the interview point of view, these are very important. So the very common question is, what is the preferable approach for data migration? Is it a BDC or BAPI? Which one is the preferable approach?
Mapping.
Immediately they'll ask why. Why is BAPI preferable?
It is a
Mapping update the database table there.
The first thing is, it won't follow the BAPI is not going to follow the screen processing. BAPI will update the tables directly by validating the data. That's why it is faster than BDC. So that it doesn't require to run all the screens, right? So the second option is, BAPI is not going to impact the system upgrades. When the system upgrades happen, BAPI is not going to impact. It will work as usual. But BDC might impact because there might be changes in the screens, standard screens. Option might change, but someone might enhance new options to the screen, right? Someone might add new options to the screens. All these things will not be captured into BDC program automatically. Okay. The other question from BDC is difference between session and call transaction. Session method follows synchronous update. Call transaction follows asynchronous update. Okay, call transaction is faster than session method. I'll give you in detailed differences when we are working on BDC program. So that's it for today. So in the next session, I'll start with creating files, like handling files, working with local files, working with application server files, uploading the file, downloading the file, and we'll create a migration program. One program using BDC, and we'll apply the same functionality using BAPI. Okay, clear?
Yes, sir.
yes.